Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is running for president as a Democratic challenger to current President Joe Biden. The Democrat establishment wants him out. The mainstream media is against him. Welcome to America Uncovered. I'm Chris Chappell. The nephew of John F. Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., is running as a Democrat in the 2024 presidential election. For some, RFK Jr. could be a fresh new face for the Democratic Party. And it's pretty sad that the Democratic Party is so stale that a Kennedy is considered fresh. It's like calling disco a fresh new dance craze. Sure, his face may not say fresh, but considering how presidential candidate Donald Trump is 77 years old and current President Joe Biden is 80, at 69 years young, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is practically a baby. Right now, of the three candidates for the Democratic Party, President Biden is leading the polls, despite a majority of people seeing him as too old to serve again. According to a CNN and SSRS poll taken in late May, Biden has 60% of Democrat and Democrat-leaning supporters on his side. RFK Jr. came in second with 20%. It's a big gap, but Biden is still in a pretty tough spot. According to CNN's poll, Biden is less popular than the three former Democratic presidents currently living. Although Biden is Democrats' first choice, almost two-thirds of all Democratic and Democratic-leaning voters say they'd at least consider backing RFK. And of those, 20% said the main reason was his name. I think I now have an idea of how our country got into the state it's in. Still, it seems that a lot of people see more positives than negatives in Kennedy. A more recent poll by The Economist and YouGov found that RFK Jr. ranks higher in favorability than all other major 2024 candidates. Taking both favorable and unfavorable opinions together, RFK Jr. has a net 19 points in his favor. In comparison, Biden and Trump are in the negative, with more unfavorable than favorable opinions. With RFK Jr. making some waves in the polls, it makes sense that the New York Times calls his 2024 bid a headache for Biden. Although that could just be brain freeze. You just had a root canal. Seriously, lay off the Ben & Jerry's, Joe. But Democrats and the mainstream media don't merely think of RFK Jr. as Biden's challenger. Some Democrats, especially establishment Democrats, are getting the jitters. Representative Robert Garcia, who is now on the Biden campaign's National Advisory Board, downplayed RFK Jr.'s chances of gaining any support, which is a pretty common tactic among political rivals. But he took it a step further when he called RFK Jr.'s worldview dangerous. Apparently, RFK Jr. isn't just a rival. He's a serious threat to America. The mainstream media seems to be on board with villainizing RFK Jr. as well, which isn't hard since he looks like he trains falcons on a yacht with celebrities. Because he does. Yep, a real everyman, this one. Now, it's one thing to hear criticism from right-leaning media. After all, he's running as a Democrat. But many left-leaning news outlets also seem to despise him. Why is that? I'll get to that after the break. Welcome back. Joe Biden is the candidate of choice for the Democratic establishment and much of the left-leaning media. So they're going after challenger Robert F. Kennedy Jr. hard. Right after news came out about RFK Jr.'s favorability, the Washington Post told readers to apply skepticism. One LA Times columnist said that RFK Jr.'s campaign could cut into a vote for a responsible Democrat like Biden. Yep, real responsible. And that example is the mainstream media being polite. Other outlets put labels on RFK Jr. calling him fringe. Some accuse RFK Jr. of pushing right-wing ideas because how dare a Democrat candidate ever agree with anything anyone on the right thinks? Some even accuse him of being like Trump. Either that or a lying crank posing as a progressive alternative to Biden. The Rolling Stone even accuses his group, the Children's Health Defense, of cozying up to white supremacists. Because of course they did. This was based on a Media Matters report that the group used Gab, which the Anti-Defamation League calls far-right and a bastion of hatred and bigotry. Kind of feels like the mainstream media wants to shoot down a third Kennedy. But why? RFK Jr. doesn't come across as a typical Democrat for many. Unlike most Democrats, RFK Jr. came out against gun control and didn't see it as a solution to reducing mass shootings. He also isn't big on supporting Ukraine. In fact, he blamed Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and neoconservatives for provoking Russia to invade. According to him, war could have been avoided if Zelensky had just said he wouldn't join NATO. RFK Jr. also accused Biden of sacrificing the youth of Ukraine for the geopolitical ambitions of neocons, which sounds an awful lot like the kind of critical thinking and anti-establishment sentiment that got Bernie Sanders sidelined. Now, you can agree or disagree with RFK Jr. on policies and positions, but the problem is that the mainstream media tends to show RFK Jr. in the worst possible light with very little evidence or explanation. For example, the New York Times said RFK Jr. spreads pro-Russian talking points without elaborating on what those points are or how they benefit Russia. Technically, saying vodka mixes great with everything is a pro-Russian talking point, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're ready to swear loyalty to Putin. The news outlet also focused on RFK Jr.'s position on the U.S. southern border, saying he sounded like a candidate far more at ease in the mushrooming Republican presidential contest for wanting to close the Mexican border. Because again, how dare a Democrat candidate agree with anything a Republican thinks? But the New York Times left out something important. They made it sound like RFK Jr.'s views regarding U.S. border policy were centered around keeping people out. What the New York Times failed to include was how RFK Jr. also supports expanding immigration, as well as his concerns about the humanitarian crisis on the southern border. He blames a lot of it on U.S. foreign policy, such as the war on drugs. They really don't paint the whole picture. This is like someone saying that you're pro-big fossil fuel and an anti-environmentalist for leaving your car running when there's a baby in the back seat. So he says a lot of things that don't exactly toe the Democratic establishment line. The one thing that the mainstream media seems to keep coming back to, though, is RFK Jr.'s views of vaccines, especially with COVID-19 in recent memory. It's here that the mainstream media gets really lazy. I'll tell you more after the break. Welcome back. The mainstream media is attacking RFK Jr. and they're singling out his views on vaccines. Now, to be fair, RFK Jr. has a history of vaccine skepticism. For example, he has argued that thimerosal, a mercury-based preservative found in vaccines, leads to autism and other neurodevelopmental disorders, and that government organizations have obscured the science on it. Even though on his websites he cites peer-reviewed scientific articles to back up those claims, the CDC says it's perfectly safe. Also, the CDC says thimerosal was removed from most children vaccines in 2001. The problem is that most mainstream media have slapped an anti-vaxxer label on RFK Jr. without backing it up with evidence. It seems like there's a mandatory rule for every mainstream media outlet to call RFK Jr. a vaccine skeptic or an anti-vaxxer. That's pretty much his identity for life. Although, to be fair, it makes sense that Kennedy wouldn't be thrilled about getting shot up. But many don't even bother to give context or even cite RFK Jr.'s exact words. For example, AP News said RFK Jr. had spread misinformation about COVID vaccines posing a potential danger. It didn't give specific quotes or links for that specific comment. Just take our word for it isn't exactly the benchmark for journalistic excellence. In another instance, the Washington Post said that Kennedy argued that a 2019 tabletop exercise about a mock pandemic at Johns Hopkins University revealed a secret plan involving U.S. spy masters to enrich drug companies and suppress free speech. They also said that he suggested that vaccines killed more people than they saved. The article provided a whole bunch of links, but none of them proved Kennedy's exact words. So it's not exactly a walk in the park for readers to verify the article's claims. Sometimes the context gets jumbled up. Many articles cite this Politico piece from RFK Jr.'s family to reinforce how wrong RFK Jr. is about COVID vaccines. But this piece was written before the pandemic and was specifically calling out RFK Jr.'s position on measles vaccines. The assumption that the mainstream media wants people to get is that RFK Jr. is against all vaccines when they conflate hesitancy against COVID vaccination and others. Since running for presidency, RFK Jr. made it a point to say he's not anti-vaccine and that he's just for safer vaccines. Now, you could argue he's just saying this to play down his bias against vaccines for political optics. But if you're going to call him an anti-vaxxer, then at least have some proof with proper context. Even getting just a little bit of context can be challenging. For example, PolitiFact pointed out that RFK Jr. made false statements about COVID-19 vaccines, and at one point said the shots record confirms that this is the deadliest vaccine ever made. This was based on his comments in a December 2021 Louisiana House Oversight meeting, but the link that PolitiFact used to cite RFK Jr. leads to a 7.5-hour-long video recording without any transcript. That makes it really hard to find RFK Jr.'s exact quotes, especially without timestamps. Sometimes you really have to dig through layers of links to get what makes Kennedy an anti-vax or conspiracy theorist. For example, in the wake of recent polling, the New York Times called RFK Jr. an anti-vaccine activist who spreads conspiracy theories and consorts with right-wing figures and billionaire donors. That certainly sounds nefarious. I mean, consorts with right-wing figures and billionaire donors? Scary. But where's the evidence? The article linked to another piece claiming that RFK Jr. was pushing right-wing ideas. Horrible. It briefly talked about him being a leading vaccine skeptic who has promoted other conspiracy theories, and it called him a longtime amplifier and propagator of baseless theories. But it didn't elaborate. That article linked to another article where the New York Times went a little more in depth about what makes RFK Jr. an anti-vaxxer conspiracy theorist. But still, the only direct quote it gave was RFK Jr. protesting vaccine mandates, which isn't necessarily the same as protesting vaccines. That's 3 articles deep for essentially nothing. Clickbait should be for celebrity gossip and movie rumors, not reality. Media outlets are quick to use his criticism against vaccine mandates as an argument that he's anti-vaccine, which is a false equivalency. They especially like bringing up his comparison of COVID policies to Nazi Germany, an offensive anti-vaccine speech. Thank you, CNN. If you hadn't told me how offensive the speech was, I wouldn't have known what to think.
It's been the ambition of every totalitarian state from the beginning of mankind to control every aspect of behavior, of conduct, of thought, and to obliterate dissent. None of them have been able to do it. They didn't have the technological capacity. Even in Hitler's Germany, you could cross the Alps into Switzerland. You can hide in an attic like Anne Frank did.
Ah yes, that classic children's tale. Everything I don't like is Hitler. Now that comparison with Nazi Germany got RFK Jr. in a lot of trouble, and he apologized. But it wasn't the first time, like when he claimed that children were getting killed from vaccines like the Holocaust. But shutting him down for making the comparison completely missed some legitimate concerns, such as how governments actually could use COVID technology for authoritarian measures, or how Big Pharma has too much influence that can easily be abused. To make matters worse, media sites are censoring what RFK Jr. actually says. ABC News edited RFK Jr.'s interview to exclude what they called false claims about COVID vaccines.
We should note that during our conversation, Kennedy made false claims about the COVID-19 vaccines. He also made misleading claims about the relationship between vaccination and autism. We've used our editorial judgment in not including extended portions of that exchange in our interview. We thank Mr. Kennedy for the conversation.
They pretty much just added their own context to his words by taking out his own words. And ABC News isn't the only organization taking out RFK Jr.'s words. Salon and Rolling Stone removed RFK Jr.'s article linking autism to vaccines years ago. And social media sites are resorting to censorship as the go-to solution. Even for those who disagree with RFK Jr., this is extremely frustrating. They find themselves saying, yes, we get it, he pushes conspiracy theories and hates vaccines, but what exactly did he say? Censoring RFK Jr. isn't going to help with addressing misinformation. It's only going to make people distrust established institutions even more. And it takes away nuance when parts of a debate are censored, even if they are inaccurate. It's kind of like how the DARE program failed because all those adults telling young kids drugs are bad without telling you why just made kids really curious and want to try drugs. And of course, there's always the question of who gets to decide what is or is not misinformation. Now that RFK Jr. is running for presidency, censoring him, or at least not giving the full picture, is definitely the DNC's way of fixing things the way they want it. Senators Bernie Sanders and Tulsi Gabbard definitely know a thing or two about the DNC and the media fixing things against them. To RFK Jr., they're asking, first time. So what do you think of RFK Jr.? Leave your comments below. And remember that we rely mainly on direct support from viewers like you. If you want to help us deliver nonpartisan news, all it takes is as little as $1 per episode over on our crowdfunding website, Patreon. Visit patreon.com/AmericaUncovered for more. Click the link below. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching America Uncovered.